"Don't go, they're waiting outside." The words left Emily Carter's mouth before her brain could stop them, whispered so close to Dominic Romano's ear that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with cigar smoke. The Mafia boss froze with his hand on the back of his chair, his dark eyes snapping to her face with an intensity that made every nerve in her body scream danger. Emily had worked at Tony's Diner in Newark for 3 years, and she had learned one golden rule above all others: never get involved in things that weren't her business. But the two men outside the window had been checking their watches for the past 10 minutes, and one of them kept reaching inside his jacket toward something metallic. And Emily knew with bone-deep certainty that if Dominic Romano walked out that door right now, he wasn't walking back. Romano studied her face for what felt like an eternity, his jaw tight and his posture perfectly still in a way that reminded Emily of a wolf deciding whether to run or attack. He was handsome in a dangerous way, probably in his mid-30s, with sharp cheekbones and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that told stories Emily probably didn't want to know. Everyone in Newark knew who Dominic Romano was, the mid-level boss who controlled the Harbor District, and Emily had seen him at table 7 twice a week for the past 6 months. The diner had gone quiet around them, and she could feel the other customers pretending not to watch while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the jukebox played an old Sinatra song that suddenly felt too loud. Outside, the two men shifted their positions under the streetlight, and fog rolled in from the harbor, turning the Newark street into something from a noir film. "Come with me," Romano said quietly, and the command in his voice made it clear this wasn't a request. Emily's hands trembled as she followed him past the kitchen where Tony was scraping the grill, through a narrow hallway that smelled like grease and old cigarettes, and into a small office she had never noticed before. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with a desk covered in papers, a filing cabinet, and a single chair that looked like it had survived a war. Romano closed the door behind them, and the click of the lock sent ice through Emily's veins because she suddenly realized she had trapped herself alone with a mafia boss who might be just as dangerous as the ones waiting outside. "You just saved my life," Romano said, leaning against the desk with his arms crossed. "Most people call me Dom. And I need to know exactly what you saw." Emily swallowed hard and forced herself to meet his eyes, even though everything inside her wanted to look away. "There are 2 men outside. They've been there for almost 20 minutes, just standing under the streetlight near the corner. One of them keeps checking his phone, and the other one has something in his jacket, something he keeps touching like he's making sure it's still there." She paused, her mind racing through the details she had noticed while refilling coffee cups and clearing plates. "But that's not what made me warn you. It's the van." Romano's eyebrows lifted slightly. "What van?" "There's a white delivery van that's been circling this block for the past 3 days," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength as she realized he was actually listening to her. "It comes by around dinner time, drives past slowly, then disappears for an hour before coming back. Tonight it's parked 2 blocks down, but I saw it earlier, and the same driver is always behind the wheel. He watches the diner entrance like he's waiting for something specific." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the stuffy warmth of the office. "And I've seen one of those men outside before. He came into the diner last week and sat at the counter for 2 hours, barely touched his food, just watched everyone who came and went. He paid special attention when you arrived." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush diamonds, and Emily watched Romano's expression shift from curiosity to something much darker. He pushed off the desk and moved to the small window that looked out onto the alley, his fingers drumming against the windowsill in a rhythm that matched Emily's racing heartbeat. When he finally turned back to face her, his eyes held a calculation that made her feel like a chess piece being moved across a board she couldn't see. "You notice a lot for a waitress," Romano said, and there was something in his tone that wasn't quite a compliment but wasn't an insult either. "I notice everything," Emily replied, lifting her chin slightly. "It's how I stay safe in a neighborhood like this. You learn to see the patterns, the things that don't belong, the people who are pretending to be something they're not." She paused, weighing her next words carefully. "You come in here twice a week, always alone, always sit at table 7 with your back to the wall, and you never look at the menu because you order the same thing every time. You tip exactly 20% and you're always polite to the staff, but your jacket is expensive enough to feed everyone in this diner for a month, and you carry a weapon under your left arm." Romano's laugh was short and sharp, more surprise than amusement. You're either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both, Emily admitted, and for the first time since entering the office, she felt a flicker of something that might have been confidence. But I'm also right, aren't I? Those men outside aren't just random trouble. They're here for you specifically. Romano was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as he processed information Emily couldn't see. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and looked back at her with an expression that was almost predatory. I need your help, he said simply. And before you say no, understand that you're already involved now. The moment you warned me, you became part of this situation whether you like it or not. Those men out there wonder what you said, what you know, and whether you're a problem they need to handle. Fear crashed through Emily like a wave, but underneath it was something else, something that felt dangerously close to excitement. She had spent 3 years being invisible, serving food to people who barely looked at her, living a life so small and predictable that she sometimes wondered if she was even really alive. And now this mafia boss with his dangerous eyes and expensive suit was offering her a glimpse into a world she had only seen in movies. A world where her observations actually mattered and her intelligence was valued instead of overlooked. What do you need me to do? Emily asked, and she heard the tremor in her own voice. Romano smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made his enemies very nervous. I need you to keep watching. Keep noticing. I think someone is setting me up for something and I can't figure out the angle yet, but you see things that other people miss. You're invisible to them, just another waitress in a diner, but you're actually one of the smartest people in this room. He pulled out a business card and a pen, scribbled something on the back and handed it to her. That's my number. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all related to me or this place or those men outside, you call me immediately. Can you do that? Emily took the card and felt the weight of the decision settle over her like a coat made of lead. He should say no. She should walk away right now, finish her shift, go home to her tiny apartment and pretend this conversation never happened. But when she looked at Romano's face and saw the genuine respect in his eyes, something inside her made a choice that her rational mind would probably regret. I can do that, she whispered. Over the next week, Emily became a spy in her own workplace and discovered that paying attention to the world around her was very different from actively hunting for clues. She started carrying a small notebook in her apron pocket and she wrote down license plate numbers of cars that lingered too long outside the diner, descriptions of customers who seemed more interested in watching than eating, and patterns in the daily rhythm of the street that felt wrong somehow. The white van came by every evening at 6:15 and 7:30, always the same driver, always circling the block twice before disappearing. The 2 men from that first night never came back, but Emily spotted 3 different people who sat alone at the counter and spent more time looking at Romano's usual table than at their food. Romano came in 4 times that week instead of his usual twice, and each time he stayed a little longer, asked a few more questions, and listened to Emily's observations with an intensity that made her feel like she was solving a puzzle that actually mattered. On Thursday night, after the dinner rush had cleared and Tony had gone home early with a headache, Romano asked Emily to sit with him at table 7, and she found herself looking at photocopies of shipping manifests and warehouse receipts that meant nothing to her untrained eyes. Someone is moving stolen goods through the harbor, Romano explained, pointing to dates and location codes that were highlighted in yellow. The problem is, these manifests have my signature on them, but I never signed any of these documents. Someone is trying to make it look like I'm stealing from my own organization and selling the merchandise to rival crews. Emily studied the papers and felt her mind clicking through possibilities like a lock tumbler finding the right combination. The van, she said suddenly. What if the van isn't watching you? What if it's carrying the stolen goods and they're using this diner as a landmark or a meeting point? You come here regularly, everyone in the neighborhood knows that, so if they want to frame you for the theft, they need to establish a pattern that connects you to the merchandise. Romano leaned back in his chair and something like admiration flickered across his face. That's exactly what I was thinking, but I needed someone else to see it too. The question is, who's orchestrating this? Who has access to my signatures, my schedule, and enough knowledge of my operations to set up a frame this elaborate? Emily bit her lip and thought about the people who had come and gone from the diner over the past week, trying to find the thread that didn't belong. Then she remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time but now felt like a neon sign pointing toward the truth. "Your lawyer was here," she said slowly. "Victor Gaines. He came in on Tuesday afternoon, sat at the counter and made a phone call that lasted almost 30 minutes. He kept his voice low, but I heard him mention your name twice and something about a shipment arriving on schedule. I thought it was just business talk, but now I'm wondering if it was something else." The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees, and Emily watched Romano's expression transform from curious to coldly furious in the space of a heartbeat. "Victor," he said softly, and the name sounded like a death sentence. "That makes sense. He has access to everything, he knows my movements better than anyone, and he's been pushing me to expand into territories I've been avoiding. If he's working with the rival crew, he could use this frame to remove me from the organization and take over my operations himself." Emily felt a thrill of fear mixed with something that might have been pride, because she had just helped uncover a betrayal that could have destroyed this dangerous man sitting across from her. But the feeling was short-lived, because Romano's next words reminded her just how deep into this situation she had fallen. "I need proof," Romano said. "And you're going to help me get it." The plan was insane, and Emily told Romano exactly that, but he just smiled his dangerous smile and reminded her that she was the only person Victor didn't know was involved. 2 days later, Emily found herself standing outside Victor Gaines's law office on a Saturday afternoon, wearing clothes that were slightly too nice for her usual style and carrying an envelope that supposedly contained documents Tony needed help with regarding the diner's lease. The story was thin enough to see through, but Victor's secretary waved her in without much interest, and Emily found herself walking down a carpeted hallway that smelled like leather and money. Victor's office was exactly what Emily expected. Dark wood, expensive art, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Newark. The lawyer himself was in his 50s with silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than Emily's car, and he looked at her with the kind of polite disinterest that rich people reserved for service workers. Emily played her part perfectly, stumbling over her words, apologizing for the interruption, asking confused questions about lease terms that didn't matter. And while Victor patiently explained things she didn't care about, Emily's eyes scanned the room and found what she was looking for. A small recorder that Romano had given her, now carefully placed inside the potted plant near Victor's desk while she pretended to steady herself after dropping her purse. The whole visit lasted 15 minutes, and when Emily left the building, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unlock her car. But the recorder was in place, and Romano had promised her that all they needed now was patience and a little bit of luck. The luck came 3 days later when Victor called a meeting with members of the rival crew in his office after hours, apparently confident enough in his scheme that he didn't bother checking for surveillance. Emily spent that evening serving tables at the diner and jumping every time her phone buzzed, waiting for Romano to confirm that the recording had captured something useful. When he finally called at 11:30, his voice was tight with controlled rage. "We got him," Romano said simply. Victor's voice is clear on the recording, instructing the crew on how to plant the evidence and timing the frame to coincide with a major shipment next week. "He even mentions taking over my territory once I'm arrested and removed from the organization. It's everything we need." Emily closed her eyes and leaned against the wall of the diner's back hallway, relief flooding through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make sure Victor and his friends face consequences," Romano replied. "But Emily, I need you to stay out of the diner tomorrow night. Can you do that? Call in sick, visit a friend, go anywhere but here. Things are going to get complicated and I need to know you're safe." Emily wanted to argue, but she heard something in Romano's voice that made her understand this wasn't negotiable. "Okay," she whispered. "But you have to promise me something. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me this won't turn into something violent." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Romano finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I promise I'll do everything I can to keep this clean. You've given me a chance to handle this the right way, Emily. That's worth more than you know." The next night, Emily sat in her apartment with the television on but not really watching it, her phone clutched in her hand as she waited for news that never came. The hours crawled by like wounded animals, and every passing car outside made her jump, convinced that something had gone terribly wrong and Romano was lying in some alley bleeding out while Victor celebrated his victory. But when her phone finally rang at midnight, Romano's voice was calm and almost cheerful. "It's done," he said. "Victor and 3 members of the rival crew are in custody. Turns out the feds have been watching Victor for months on an unrelated case, and when I handed them the recording along with copies of the forged manifests, they moved fast. Victor tried to run, but they picked him up at the airport with a suitcase full of cash and fake passports. The rival crew is singing like canaries trying to cut deals, and my name is completely clear." Emily felt tears stinging her eyes, and she wasn't even sure if they were from relief or exhaustion or something else entirely. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you safe now?" "Safer than I've been in months," Romano replied. "And that's because of you. Your observation, your courage, your willingness to help someone you had every reason to ignore. You saved my life twice, Emily. Once when you warned me at the diner, and again when you helped me find the truth." "I just noticed things," Emily said quietly. "Anyone could have done it." "No," Romano said firmly. "Not anyone. Most people go through life blind to what's happening around them. You see the world clearly and you're not afraid to act on what you see. That's rare. That's valuable. That's something I won't forget." They talked for a few more minutes, Romano explaining how the organization had cleaned house after Victor's arrest and how he had been promoted to a position with more power and fewer enemies. He thanked her again, told her to take a few days off from the diner with pay, and promised that if she ever needed anything, all she had to do was call. When Emily finally hung up the phone, she sat in the darkness of her apartment and realized that her life had changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. 3 weeks later, Emily was back at Tony's diner serving coffee and taking orders like nothing had happened, but everything felt different now. She moved through her shifts with a new confidence, no longer invisible but aware of her own power to observe and understand and act. Romano still came in twice a week and sat at table 7, but now when he arrived, there was a subtle nod between them, an acknowledgement of shared secrets and mutual respect. The other men in his organization treated her with a careful politeness that bordered on deference, and Tony had given her a raise without explanation, just a knowing smile and a comment about how good employees deserved recognition. Emily never asked Romano for details about what happened to Victor or the rival crew members who had tried to frame him, and he never volunteered the information. Some doors, once opened, were better left only slightly ajar. But late at night when Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about those 2 men waiting outside the diner and the choice she had made to speak up instead of staying silent. She thought about the fear and the excitement and the strange thrill of being seen for who she really was instead of being ignored as just another waitress in a greasy diner. The world was bigger than Emily had allowed herself to believe, and it was filled with patterns and puzzles and dangerous people who sometimes needed help from the most unlikely sources. She had stepped into that world for just a moment and then stepped back out, but the experience had changed her in ways she was still discovering. She was braver now, sharper, more aware of the power that came from paying attention and trusting her instincts. On a Thursday evening 2 months after that first warning, Emily was wiping down tables when a young woman rushed into the diner looking panicked, her eyes scanning the room like she was searching for someone. Emily watched the woman for a moment and noticed the trembling hands, the glances toward the door, the way she kept checking her phone with increasing desperation. Something was wrong, and Emily felt that familiar pull, that instinct that had saved Romano's life and changed her own. "Are you okay?" Emily asked quietly, moving closer to the woman's table. The woman looked up with tears in her eyes, and Emily saw the beginning of a new story, another chance to use her gift for observation to make a difference. She thought about Romano sitting at table 7 with his back to the wall, about Victor's betrayal and the white van circling the block, about all the invisible threads that connected people in ways they never expected. And she realized that her life at Tony's diner was never going to be small or predictable again, because she had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most ordinary people in the most ordinary places have the power to change everything, if they're brave enough to act when it matters. Emily pulled out her order pad and sat down across from the frightened woman, ready to listen and observe and help however she could, because that was who she was now. Not just a waitress serving coffee and clearing plates, but someone who saw the truth behind the surface and wasn't afraid to lean close and whisper the words that could save a life. "Tell me what's wrong," Emily said softly. "And don't worry. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." The woman took a shaky breath and began to speak, and Emily listened with the same intense focus she had given Romano that first night, knowing that sometimes the smallest actions created the biggest ripples and that her quiet life in Newark had become something far more meaningful than she ever could have imagined. The diner continued its usual rhythm around them, customers eating and laughing and living their lives completely unaware that in a corner booth, another story was beginning, another chance for Emily Carter to prove that courage and intelligence could tip the scales in a dangerous world. And somewhere across the diner, Romano caught Emily's eye and gave her the smallest nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do, and that the waitress who had saved his life was now becoming something more than either of them had expected. The night stretched ahead with all its possibilities and dangers, and Emily faced it with clear eyes and a steady heart, ready for whatever came next.